My brother's wife was still laughing when I carried my suitcase down the front steps at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I could hear her through the open window, that high, breathless laugh she used for her lifestyle videos. The kind that sounds like she practiced it in a mirror. Maybe she had. My brother had married a woman whose entire personality was content. And apparently, watching his younger sister leave with everything she owned in 2 bags was content too. Because I could see the blue glow of her phone screen in the window the whole way to my car. I did not look back. Our father had been dead for 6 weeks. The will had been read for 4. And for the past 3 weeks, I had been living in the spare bedroom of the house my brother inherited, the house I grew up in. The same house where I had spent last Christmas watching my father's hands shake too hard to unwrap his own gifts. I should have known my brother wouldn't let me stay long. He had never been able to tolerate anything that reminded him that other people had needs. It's just not working out, he told me that morning, leaning against the kitchen counter in the cashmere robe I had given our father 2 birthdays ago. He was holding his coffee with both hands like the conversation was inconveniencing him. Tiffany's expanding her content studio. She needs the room. You understand. I understood perfectly. Our father had owned 3 things worth anything. The house in Dunwoody, a brokerage account just over $900,000, and an old commercial property in Norcross, a print shop he had run through most of the 90s before the business died and he shut the doors. The house and the brokerage account went to my brother. Clean, first line of the will, no conditions. The second line gave me the print shop. My brother had laughed when the attorney read it. Not cruelly, exactly more like someone who had already heard the joke and was just being polite about pretending it was new. That place hasn't been open in 8 years, he said. The roof probably leaks. He was not wrong about the roof. I had driven past the building once, right after the reading, just to understand what I had inherited. It was a flat-faced commercial space on a corner lot in Norcross, maybe 3,000 square feet, plywood over 2 front windows, a parking lot with weeds growing through every crack, and a sign above the door that still said Hargrove Printing in faded green letters. A flyer for a pizza place from 2019 was still taped to the front glass. I sat in my car and looked at it for a long time. Then I drove back to my brother's house and started applying for apartments. Apartments cost money. I didn't have liquid. I had savings, but not enough for first, last, and deposit in the Atlanta market, not on a data analyst salary with student loans still pulling $200 a month out of my checking account. So I made spreadsheets. I sent applications. I drank coffee every morning in my father's kitchen, while my sister-in-law filmed herself 6 feet away and pretended I wasn't there. Then Tuesday happened. I stood on the sidewalk at 11:14 p.m. with a suitcase, a laptop bag, and a box of my father's things I had managed to hold onto. And I looked at my phone. Both of my closest friends had roommates and no floor space. The cheapest hotel within 10 miles was $91 a night. I did not have the kind of financial cushion that could absorb $91 a day while an apartment application worked its way through a queue. But I had one key in my jacket pocket. It was old and brass, with a strip of masking tape on the grip. My father's handwriting, Norcross. I drove to Norcross. The front deadbolt had long since stopped catching. The door opened with a shoulder push. I stood in the dark for a moment, smelling old ink and dust and something underneath both of those things. Something dry and papery that brought back, without warning, the library where my father used to take me on Saturday mornings when I was 7. He would let me pick any 2 books. He always picked one himself. I had not thought about that in years. I found the breaker box by the light of my phone. The electricity, to my genuine surprise, was still connected. The fluorescence buzzed on. The front room was gutted. Printing equipment gone, sold off at some point. What remained was a long wooden counter, empty shelving along one wall, a broken office chair, and about 800 square feet of cracked concrete. The back hallway led to a bathroom with cold running water and a storage room with a folding table and a metal shelving unit holding nothing. I pushed the folding table against the wall, spread my winter coat across it, and lay down. I am not going to pretend that night was anything other than what it was. I have read enough of those stories, the rock bottom that becomes a beginning, the cold floor that turns out to be a foundation, and they always sand off the part where the person is just a human being, alone in an empty building, 29 years old, with a dead father and a brother who handed back her suitcase with the same expression he used returning items at a department store. I cried for about 40 minutes. Then I stopped, because crying had never once solved a logistics problem, and I had several. In the morning I made a list. The building needed a proper walkthrough. Utilities needed transferring to my name. I needed to know what I had inherited, not emotionally, not as a memory, but structurally. What did it cost to maintain? Could it be rented? Sold? What exactly was here? That last question was the one that changed everything. I spent the first morning cleaning, partly because I think better when my hands are moving, and partly because I had noticed something in my initial walkthrough I couldn't explain. The building was rectangular, roughly 3,000 square feet, front retail area, back hallway, storage room, small office. But the exterior dimensions, which I had paced out across the parking lot before coming inside, didn't match what I could see from the inside. By about 400 square feet, I found the survey documents in a manila envelope taped to the inside surface of the front counter. My father had placed them there deliberately, deed, utility, account paperwork, and the survey, all together. He had written my name on the envelope. Not my brother's name. Mine. I stood there, holding the envelope for a minute before I could open it. The survey confirmed it. There was a basement. I found the door on my second day. It was in the storage room, behind the metal shelving unit, which was bolted to the wall. Not padlocked, bolted, with 4 heavy machine bolts that required a socket wrench to remove. Whoever had put them in had not wanted this door opened by accident. I drove to a hardware store. Socket wrench set, work light, box of protein bars. I came back and spent 3 hours on those bolts. The door opened inward. The stairs were concrete, solid, metal handrail that held when I tested my weight. I clipped the work light to my belt loop and went down. The basement was climate controlled. I stopped on the 3rd step when I felt it. The air was cool and dry. Nothing like the dust-warm air above. Someone had installed a separate HVAC system down here. That was not nothing. That was intention. Infrastructure, sustained over years. The second thing I noticed was the shelving floor to ceiling, custom built, running the full length of 3 walls. And on those shelves, in archival sleeves, and flat boxes, and labeled tubes, were prints. Hundreds of them. I am a data analyst. I approach unfamiliar information the way I approach a new dataset. No assumptions. Start with what I can confirm. Don't react until I understand what I'm looking at. I walked the shelves slowly, reading labels, not touching anything, photographing with my phone. The labels were all in my father's handwriting. Dates, names, edition numbers, dimensions. I recognized 2 of the names. The first was an artist whose retrospective I had seen at the High Museum the previous spring, large crowds, pieces in the auction recap that had made me stop and read the paragraph twice. The second was a sculptor whose prints I had seen in a Buckhead gallery, priced at amounts that made me check the tag twice to confirm I was reading it right. Both of them had apparently sold prints to my father in the early 90s. When they were young and unknown, and a print shop owner in Norcross was one of the few people willing to give them wall space and pay fair prices for their work. I sat down on the basement floor. I stopped thinking like a daughter. I had spent 6 weeks thinking like a daughter, trying to be fair, trying to be patient, trying to make space for my brother's grief, even while he was taking everything that wasn't nailed down. None of that was useful to me now. What was useful was the part of my brain that builds models and runs numbers, and understands that what I was looking at was not sentiment. It was not memory. It was an asset portfolio. I photographed every piece in the basement that evening. 93 prints across 22 artists. I cross-referenced names against recent auction records until 2 in the morning, sitting on the concrete floor with my back against the shelving, my laptop balanced on my knees. By the time I stopped, my conservative estimate, low end, pessimistic, discounted for condition and timing, was somewhere between $800,000 and $1.4 million. I wrote the number down. My hand was not entirely steady. I called an art appraiser the following morning. Found through the High Museum's website she was listed as a consultant for estate valuations. She came 2 days later and spent 4 hours in the basement without saying much. When she came back upstairs and sat across from me at the wooden counter with her laptop, I watched her screen more than her face. The 2 artists I had recognized accounted for the majority of the value, but there were 3 others I hadn't known, regional artists, who had built serious reputations in the decades since my father had bought their early work. One of them had died in 2019, which the appraiser explained, with the careful neutrality of someone experienced in delivering these numbers near grief, had significantly affected the value of his remaining pieces. Her preliminary total, pending formal documentation and provenance review, $1.8 million. Auction estimate, $2 to $2.4 million, depending on venue and timing. I thanked her and walked her to the door. Then I stood in the empty front room for a long time, looking at the reflection of the Hargrove printing sign in the glass of the door. He had known. He had spent years acquiring these pieces not as a calculated investment strategy, or at least not consciously, but as belief. He had believed in these artists before the market did, before the museums did, before anyone was paying attention. And then he had preserved everything, carefully and quietly, in a basement he had told no one about except the daughter he had decided to leave it to. I thought about the masking tape on the key. He had not left me a rundown print shop. He had left me everything he trusted me to find. I was still working through the implications when my brother called. He had heard about the appraiser. I still don't know the exact path, possibly through her assistant, possibly through someone in the neighborhood who had noticed an unfamiliar car in the lot 2 days in a row. He called on a Friday afternoon with his voice arranged in that particular way it gets when he is trying to project casualness and not quite landing it. "I heard you had someone come out to the building," he said. "I did." "What for?" "Estate inventory," I said, which was accurate. A pause. "I think we should talk about the property," he said. "Dad's intentions, I mean. The will was written a while ago. Situations change. I think we should sit down as a family and figure out how to handle the estate equitably." Equitably. I had not heard that word from my brother during the 3 weeks I had slept in his spare bedroom. I had not heard it when he transferred the brokerage account into his name within 10 days of the will reading. I had not heard it when he took the vinyl collection I had specifically told the attorney I wanted. The week the estate was still being organized, and I had not yet understood that I needed to state things in writing to be heard. The will is clear, I said. I don't think there's anything to discuss. He came to the building anyway. A Sunday morning, 2 days later. Pulling into the lot in the restored Camaro, our father had spent 15 years on another piece of the estate that had gone to my brother without discussion. He stood in the parking lot in clean clothes, looking at the building like it had personally inconvenienced him by existing. I met him at the door. He walked through the front room. He looked in the storage room. He looked in the office. And then his eyes settled on the door in the storage room, now back on its hinges, unbolted, simply closed, and stayed there for a beat, longer than the rest of the room had held his attention. "What's down there?" he said. "Storage?" I said. "I'd like to see it." "No," I said. He looked at me with an expression I had been familiar with my entire life, the particular configuration of his face that expected me to recalibrate, to find a softer way to say yes, to arrive at giving him what he wanted, through a route that let us both pretend it was my decision freely made. I had been doing that my whole life. I had done it when he took our father's watch at the hospital before I had even had a chance to ask. I had done it on a Tuesday night when I carried my own suitcase down my own father's front steps. I was done doing it. The building and its contents were left to me, I said. The will is filed with the probate court. If you'd like to contest it, you'll need an attorney. He left. 3 days later, I received a letter from an attorney representing my brother, claiming the personal property stored in the basement constituted a shared family legacy asset, subject to equitable distribution under Georgia probate law. I read it twice. Then I called my own attorney. She was an estate and probate specialist. I found her through a colleague who had used her for an unrelated matter. She reviewed the letter, and the will, and the inventory, and called me back in 48 hours. "The will is unambiguous," she said. "The property and all its contents. His claim has no legal basis. What he's doing is applying pressure, expecting you to settle, rather than absorb the cost and stress of litigation." "Will he actually file?" I asked. "He might. But here is what I would recommend. Move forward with the auction now. Once those assets are liquidated, a claim against them becomes substantially more complicated and substantially less attractive to pursue." The auction preparation took 8 weeks. I learned more about printmaking, paper conservation, and the secondary art market in those 8 weeks than I had in my entire previous life. I also learned, through title searches and county assessor records I pulled methodically over several evenings, something about the property itself that I had not understood until I looked. The block where the print shop sat had been the subject of a quiet acquisition campaign for 3 years. A mixed-use development company had been working their way through properties on that corridor. I could trace it through deed transfers, one by one. 6 of the 8 properties on the block had changed hands. The 2 that hadn't were mine and the dry cleaner next door, owned by a man named Mr. Pearson, who had run that business for 38 years. I went and introduced myself. We had coffee. He told me the development company had last approached him with an offer of $420,000. He had declined 3 times. He was 71 years old and had no interest in apartments, he described with a precision that told me they had already shown him the renderings. I spread my survey documents on the table between us, and told him what I had found. The development company had offered me $850,000 for my property, twice what they had offered him, because my corner lot held an easement access point that their planned parking structure required. Without my property configured correctly in the footprint, the project didn't work the way they had designed it. He was quiet for a moment. "They offered you twice what they offered me," he said. "I have something they need," I said. "And just so do you. I think if we negotiate together, as a single holdout position, the number for both of us changes considerably." He thought it over for 2 days. Then he called me back and said yes. We retained a real estate attorney and returned to the development company as a unit. The negotiation ran 6 weeks. My brother's attorney filed the formal probate motion during the 3rd week, a claim my attorney moved to dismiss with a precision and efficiency I found genuinely satisfying to watch from a distance. The auction cleared first. I watched the feed on my laptop from the folding table. I had kept it. I had grown attached to it in the way you grow attached to things that held you when nothing else would. The 2 major artists' prints sold in the first 30 minutes. One lot went 11 bidding rounds before the auctioneer paused before announcing the final number. When the session closed, my phone rang. Final auction total: $2,340,000. I set the phone down on the table. I sat still for a moment that was not short. I thought about my father in the early 90s. Spending money he probably couldn't comfortably spare on artists nobody else was buying. Storing everything carefully. Maintaining that climate-controlled basement through 8 years of vacancy while the building sat dark and the pizza flyer yellowed on the front door. Writing my name on a manila envelope and taping it to a counter. Waiting for me to find it. I let myself think about him. That was the only time I allowed that. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. The real estate negotiation closed 3 weeks after the auction. Mr. Pearson received $1,100,000 for his property. I received $1,650,000 for mine. with a separate structured payment for the easement rights that my attorney had identified, isolated, and priced in a way that still makes me grateful every time I think about those 6 weeks of work she did. The probate claim against the basement inventory was dismissed on the same Friday as the real estate transfer. 4 paragraphs from the court explaining why the will's language was clear, and the claim had no foundation. My brother was ordered to cover a portion of my legal costs. I know his reaction because his wife posted about it. Not about the case directly, she was too careful for that, but about betrayal, and family wounds, and the pain of being misunderstood by the people closest to you. There was a sponsored moisturizer tagged at the bottom of the post. Some things remain perfectly consistent. I called my brother once, after everything closed. Not to draw anything out. Not to make him feel what I had felt. I had too much ahead of me to spend time arranging someone else's emotions. I called because I had one thing to say, and I wanted to say it to him directly, rather than carry it quietly for years. Dad didn't leave you less, I told him. He left you what you had always already taken. The house, the accounts, the car. He left me what you never bothered to look at. He didn't say anything. He loved you, I said. He left you proof of that everywhere. I hope you find it eventually. I hung up. I used the first portion of the proceeds to pay off my student loans. It took 45 minutes online and gave me a feeling I am still not sure I have adequate language for, like setting down something heavy that you have been carrying for so long you forgot it had weight. I put a down payment on a condominium in Midtown. Small, clean, a second bedroom I've made into an office. I kept enough liquid to operate for 2 years without income. Because my father taught me to understand the floor before you start thinking about the ceiling. He said it once when I was about 14 and I did not really understand it then. I understand it now. The remainder I used to acquire a small data consulting firm in Buckhead. The owner was ready to retire. I had spent 3 months analyzing the client list from the outside, before making an offer studying the data, the way I had learned to study everything, without assumptions, starting with what I could confirm. The firm had 4 employees when I took it over. It has 5 now, as of last month. I kept 1 print from the basement. I did not send it to auction. It is small, 12 inches by 16, by one of the lesser-known artists my father had collected. A painter from Athens, who never achieved the kind of posthumous recognition that moves prices. It is a simple image, a window looking out over an empty lot, with light falling at an angle that makes it impossible to tell whether the day is beginning or ending. My father bought it in 1993, according to the label in his handwriting. He kept it in a climate-controlled basement for 30 years. I have it above my desk now. I look at it when I am working and sometimes when I am not. There is something useful about that light, the way it refuses to tell you which direction things are moving. I have stopped needing it to. What I know, standing on this side of everything that happened, is this. My father did not fail me when he left me a building with plywood on the windows and weeds in the parking lot. He did not overlook me or misunderstand me or run out of things to give. He left me the one inheritance that required something of the person receiving it: attention, patience, the willingness to go down into a dark basement and look carefully at what was there. My brother had looked at that building and seen nothing, because he was only capable of seeing the things that were already obvious. The house was obviously valuable. The brokerage account was obviously valuable. He took both, efficiently, without ceremony, because they required nothing from him except possession. What our father left me required me. I think he knew that when he wrote my name on that envelope. I think he knew I was the one who would look, who would pace out the exterior dimensions and notice the discrepancy, who would spend 3 hours with a socket wrench rather than accept that a locked door was a barrier. I think he knew my brother would never set foot in that building, because my brother had always preferred the things that were easy to see, and our father had spent 30 years quietly placing his faith in things that weren't, the things he believed in before anyone else did. There is a version of this story where I am still waiting, still making myself small in the house I grew up in, still carrying my suitcase down the front steps in the dark while someone laughs in an upstairs window. I am not in that version anymore, and I will never go back to it.